Okay, I think that we should probably press on. It is lunchtime, people will be busy. So I think it's probably a good idea. So just once again, before we do start, anybody who is happy to be on camera, we'd be grateful just because it allows us to have a little bit of visual with our audience. We will keep you muted, but if you have a question, please either pop it in the chat, we'll be monitoring there, or put your hand up and I will obviously keep an eye out, as will Matt. So first things first, thank you to everybody for joining us. I appreciate everyone's busy, got a lot to be getting on with. Quick introduction from myself and Matt, who are your sort of speakers for the day. My name is Nicola Fleet-Milne. I am a co-chair of the Jewellery Quarter Neighbourhood Planning Forum. Matt is my other co-chair, so that's us as a team. My day job is I run a residential letting agency in Birmingham City Centre, and I live in the Jewellery Quarter. That's my link into this. Matt, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my day job is I'm head of design for a large construction firm, but the reason why I'm predominantly here is I'm a director of the Jewellery Quarter Development Trust, and I look after planning and development. It's probably worth me noting that I became a director of the trust looking after planning and development because of my involvement in the neighbourhood plan. But I live in the Jewellery Quarter and have done for over 10 years.
Lovely, thank you. So obviously I just draw everyone's attention to the fact that we have day jobs and Jewellery Quarter neighbourhood planning isn't our day job. So that's just our plea for leniency. Please be kind. We may not know the answer to absolutely everything, but the plan for today is to be able to take you through the headline stuff in the plan. It is a draft plan, because we need people's feedback. We need to be able to make changes because of feedback from the community once the Regulation 14 period on the 25th of September has ended. So the plan for today is Matt is going to give you a little bit of background as to why we set all of this up and why we have carried on for the last 7 years. And then we'll go into, I'll then share my screen and we'll run through a presentation. Please, it would be nice to, if you have questions as we go, put your hands up or put them in the chat, because actually we want it to be more of a conversation than just a monologue from us. So if everyone's happy with that, I shall hand over to Matt to give you some context.
Okay, Magic. Now, have you got the presentation on screen? Perfect. Just minimize that. Thank you very much, Nick, and welcome everyone. Just a reminder that we're being recorded as well, so people can watch this back at a time of their own convenience. But really, I guess start the following on from what Nicola was saying about this being a draft. The journey started approximately 7 years ago with a grassroots desire from the community to do something with the Jewellery Quarter, and trying to resolve some of the issues of the quarter, but also achieve some of the aims of the quarter. And neighbourhood planning, or the Localism Act, which introduced neighbourhood planning, was one of the tools available. Really, the issues that galvanised people, dereliction, of which there's even 7 years on, there's still buildings that aren't listed.
Apologies, I'm just going to cut in there. Matt, you might want to just rewind about 30 seconds. We lost you for a little bit there. Just checking that Matt has got
sorry. I must. I'm in.
Matt
I'm in Cornwall, and the internet isn't particularly good. Can you hear me?
I can now. That seems better. Do you want to turn your camera off while you talk? That will help your broadband. That's better. Much better.
Simple. How's that? Now you've all seen me. It's probably best. Right. So going back, where do you want me to go from? Sorry.
I'm going to go
7 years ago.
7 years ago, it all got set up because of the Localism Act.
So the Localism Act was effectively gave us a tool to deal with some of the issues of the jewellery quarter, and that is neighbourhood planning. But what really galvanised people around some of the issues that the jewellery quarter had to deal with include dereliction of listed buildings, but also other heritage buildings in the conservation area. The poor design of new buildings coming through, which both of those aspects told us that both the principle of a conservation area and the design guide, which already exists for the area, weren't doing their jobs. Really a bit of a feeling of the best people to say what the jewellery quarter needs are the people in the jewellery quarter, and a sensation that therefore the planning system as it stood wasn't really delivering, and also quite out of date at that time. So neighbourhood plans gave us the tool to tackle this. It was 7 years ago that we started the process, and if you just flick back one slide, sorry Nick, the neighbourhood plan area is the jewellery quarter with Great Old Street in the southeast corner and the Ring Road in the northwest corner, and then the rest of that industrial area. So we've got a pretty clear boundary of businesses and residents that are all very well connected to each other. Next slide.
Has everybody caught all of that? I hope that that's all made some sense. Okay, so the slide that we're currently on, from what Matt has explained, hopefully that makes a lot more sense. So the vision for the Jewellery Quarter neighbourhood plan is for the Jewellery Quarter to be a successful community of businesses and residents, and that is important because we will go out to referendum both to the residents and to the businesses in the area, with jewellery and design making at its heart. It will foster a creative approach to conservation whilst demanding the highest quality design for new development, and it will stimulate the vitality of the area by making it easier to get around and giving people a reason to stay. So what we've done here is we have 4 goals. We wanted to keep this simple and easy to understand and apply. So our goals are enabling businesses and residents to coexist and be successful together, drive up the quality of new developments and avoid dereliction, to protect the heritage of beautiful buildings, jewellery and creative industries and those allied activities, and facilitate the wider projects needed to support the growth and vitality of the Jewellery Quarter. So what we thought would be useful today is, rather than go into necessarily the policy of all of that, we will talk through some of the big ideas around how we intend to make these things happen. If you do have questions around a bit more of the detail, like I said, please feel free to put things either in the chat or to put your hand up, and we will keep an eye and answer as best we can. So I don't know whether we've actually lost Matt completely, so I'm going to crack on. So the first, are you there, Matt?
Yeah. You just can't
okay, well, do you want to do this first one?
Yeah, so in order to, there's 4 goals there, but rather than have a simple thing that talks about how that goal is delivered, there's, as you might expect in the Jewellery Quarter, there's lots of of cross-cutting themes which will deliver on several goals. And at the heart, and right at the biggest, this idea of putting the jewellery industry right at the centre and at the forefront of planning in the jewellery quarter. And this big idea is simply having a creative district where the jewellery industry is currently based, not where it was based 100 years ago. And any development taking place in that jewellery has to provide space or improvements that benefit the jewellery and other creative industries. And as you can see in the map on the right, there's a series of purple buildings with purple plots, and that's where the jewellery industry done a survey, and there's lots of evidence to back this up. And the hatched area around it is this creative district that links them all together and really puts jewellery making and creative industries at the heart of the jewellery quarter. Associated with that, there's the planning policy to pave the way for a jewellery quarter creative incubator, and that is it's something, you know, skills and business development is not something that the planning system can do, but what the planning system can offer is to clear the way so to enable something like this to be set up.
Lovely, thank you. So
next slide.
Here's our second big idea area. As most of you probably in and around the jewellery quarter will have noticed over the years, there's a fairly high level of dereliction in the jewellery quarter. And that was definitely one of the original reasons for launching the Neighbourhood Plan Forum. So a lot of this is really focused on both the safeguarding of heritage buildings and the well, we won't do the enforcement, obviously that will be the council, but putting things in place that mean that the council have better reason to enforce. So that's the older properties, but new properties coming through, also wanting them to be of a specific and specifically excellent design to suit the modern requirements, and also to be as well designed as the older heritage buildings. So there's a couple of pictures on there that give you good examples of a beautiful old building that's just not being looked after properly, and then a more modern building that has been designed in keeping with the look of the heritage and the way that the jewellery quarter looks. I imagine that quite a few people on this call may well be quite interested in that side of it. I'm not sure whether that's kind of what drives people wanting to come here, but that is one of the things that we're quite keen to achieve. Matt, would you like to talk through the nodes?
Yeah, sure. So this one is really one of the transformational ones that will be very visible, and this is all about creating both more public spaces where people can dwell. The research and surveys show that people want somewhere to be able to sit and have a sandwich or have a coffee or meet friends, and this was from a couple of years ago. It's been thrown into stark relief with the coronavirus outbreak. But also one of the pieces of feedback was that the jewellery quarter is quick because roads will continue straight for a bit and then just go off at an angle. So one of the things that we can do is have these public spaces, these nodes or string of pearls, which are areas of high quality public realm, which will have active use, so cafe or a bar or a shop, and these become little super local focal points that help people navigate around the quarter because they are a landmark, but give developers building near them or restoring buildings near them. It's an extra asset in their neighbourhood. So you can see in the map on the right, the area, the nodes that we've identified. Some of them exist already, such as Deas Square or Golden Square, and some of them don't yet exist, such as Jewellers Square near the Jewellers Arms. The different colours just represent what types of nodes they are, so arrival points into the jewellery quarter or major junctions.
Lovely.
Next slide.
Here we go. So this is a particular initiative that is about us opening up some of the lost routes through the jewellery quarter. So those of you who know it well will know, for example, that if you walk from the city core down Newhall Street, you will get to a point where the road essentially ends, and you either have a choice to go left onto Graham Street, or you could have turned right onto St Paul's Square a little earlier, but ultimately you're faced with essentially a big wall. So we are looking to increase the footfall through the jewellery quarter by opening up some of these routes. Matt, you might be able to actually sort of explain a little bit more deftly where some of these routes are, because some of them go through plots that are currently going through planning permission.
Yeah, so I guess the one that the eye's drawn to most immediately is the one that the image is from, but also that you described as you come down Newhall Street going through the A.E. Harris development. Yeah. So the planning application for A.E. Harris has this route, which will effectively connect up Golden Square through to Newhall Street. But we want to make sure it's in the neighbourhood plan, because if that planning permission lapses, then we want something to be there to say, no, this must happen. That's the main one. And the Prince's Foundation did a report that said that was key to unlocking investment in the jewellery quarter and dealing with some of the heritage issues. Then over, if you got a cursor that you can move down?
I don't know if it can
on the screen, Nick.
Can you see my cursor?
Yeah. So if you just want to take a quick canter through, and I can explain any particular. If you go north, actually, to the Big Peg.
Big Peg here.
Yeah, there. So this is one of the most interesting one. The original route that connects Northampton Street to Victoria Street, but it goes straight through the Big Peg. We've spoken to the owners of the Big Peg, and they're keen on introducing a route from Golden Square through the Big Peg, but that will really connect the hive of activity around Golden Square through to the area to the north, which suffers from being cut off. Then over to the west, you've got the St George's Urban Village. They've introduced a route through their site, but then there's a large call centre to the south of it, which doesn't have a pedestrian connection through. That, again, bringing people through, driving footfall, unlocks some of these sites and allows them to be developed, and makes it just easier to get around the jewellery quarter, and easier to attract investment, and to get a safer area, more people living and working in some of these.
And what's this one down here, Matt?
That one is that connects onto Newhall Square. So that is the old canal arm, which runs alongside UCB. But if you have a look around that UCB site, there's an enormous city block with quite a line to walk.
Yes.
So that that's a passageway that UCB developed their campus.
So I'm thinking, for example, for you, Brian, that would be very close to where you are and would allow you to cut through a lot quicker than to be walking all the way around one of these city blocks. So, and this one here actually has already been realised, because this is the one that comes through from Co-op and goes out to the canal. Both of these have been realised through the Whitmore collection. So any of you who've been down that way, you will have seen that has been opened up. And interestingly, despite the fact that this plan is not currently an adopted plan, that's obviously still the work we're trying to do, the developers paid attention and listened to what the community had said they were interested in achieving. So that's one of the reasons that that access way has been achieved. So anything else that you wanted to say on that?
Over to the yeah, I think the kind of the elephant in the room that's been there for some years, and then in response to one of the questions, is the crossing from the Jewellery Quarter across Great Charles Street into the Colmore area. Now, these are, you can see we've deliberately put some dotted lines across there to reinforce the future planning of the for pedestrians at grade, not having to go over a bridge or into a subway.
I think cutting out quite a bit at the moment. So these are the two areas that he's talking about. I hope you can all see my cursor. You'll recognise them as the bridge and the underpass. And those are two key entrances to the Jewellery Quarter that we currently feel need some serious attention. I imagine everybody feels strongly about that, because neither of them is pretty or particularly screaming secure. Whilst many of us, I'm sure, just brave it, it's not necessarily how we would want it to be. So these are two areas that, again, we've focused on because we want those to be improved. For those of you who've been keeping an eye on what we locally call the bomb site, which is where MODA have submitted their planning application for, I think, 770 something units, we are hoping desperately that as part of that, they will, to a degree, it's not a deal, but, you know, will they adopt, for example, some responsibility over the subway? Because if we can help with anything like that, you know, if the developers can be persuaded to take some responsibility, that's what we're trying to achieve. So I hope that that makes some sense. Somebody's also asked, so I assume that the question about the over and underpass is to the JQ. Actually, that question is specifically related to the bridge and the underpass. Okay, so are there any other questions in there? Unfortunately, I can't see the questions at the moment because while I'm screen sharing, I don't get to see. So as long as you pop them in the chat, I will get a text with some information. So, okay, so that's that point about connectivity. Here are more points on connectivity, which is our current main routes through the Jewellery Quarter. I hope those of you who are on the call will recognise these routes. I'm sure they're routes that you take yourselves frequently. But what we're trying to, again, achieve through the draft plan is that those major routes have activity rather than being quiet streets that ultimately shouldn't be quiet. So again, Newhall Street's always a great example of so many things. You walk from the city core into the Jewellery Quarter down Newhall Street, it's clearly a huge main route, and yet the level of activity at ground level is pretty limited, and it can make it a quiet and lonely walk late at night, or just a fairly dull and uninspiring walk during the day. It doesn't have to be about security, it's about things going on. So we're trying to work to ensure that the main routes through the Jewellery Quarter will have shops, workplaces, leisure premises on the ground floor to keep those streets busy and safe. I'm sure that many of you will have opinions around residential schemes going up, which end up with unused ground floor units, and that to us is as bad as no ground floor unit. So that would actually then link back to the earlier point of having appropriate space that can be utilised by the businesses, whether they be professional services or actually the creative cluster, so that's both jewellers, manufacturers and PR, marketing, etc., IT. Those ground floor units need to be designed in a way that is more appropriate. So we are going to attract delis, butchers, bakers, etc., rather than them just being large units that nobody can either afford or wants. So I hope that that makes sense about why we've been looking at that. These are all quite major routes through. Some of them are a lot busier, but there are many of them that are very quiet, and so that's what we want to achieve there. I'm looking at you all to make sure that you're listening and it makes some sense. I hope it does. Something else that not so much, so the canals, again, that's also the same premise really as the streets. We want them to be used, we want them to be busy, but you know, well maintained and generally safer. They're obviously a small part of the jewellery quarter, but I think they're a pretty important part of our quarter. And linked in with that is the idea of having more public art. It's something that I think every time we've had something interesting go into the jewellery quarter, everybody celebrates it, and we're all very keen to preserve it. But actually, we want to drive more of that. You know, Digbeth has street art on the walls. That's not necessarily what we have, but actually, what can we? We're a maker district. We are still industrious in that sense. There must be more that we can be adding to our physical surrounds. Again, this would link back, I think, quite nicely to the nodes, to those that Matt talked through, where you have these, that as much as you have dwell space, do you also have something that is appealing to the eye? You know, I'll meet you by that statue of, you know, they become obvious meeting places or landmarks by which you direct people, whether they're coming to see you or meet you at a cafe, what have you. So definitely an increase in artwork. So that helps just to, I'll go back one, sorry, not so as not to distract. So those are the majority of our big ideas. There's obviously a lot more in the draft plan that's online, a lot more detail. We'll now just run through for you the way that we have split the actual neighbourhood plan into the 4 areas. So they pivot around the goals that we talked about earlier, but there are the goals, because of the way that the jewellery quarter is, there are goals that overlap, and they're goals that one goal on its own may not be enough, but it will help to deliver something else in partnership. So we're obviously looking to support and protect the jewellery and creative industries. It's called the jewellery quarter. You know, we really do need to make sure that we both preserve what we have and provide the right space and the right support to improve it and bring through the next generations. You know, we have the School of Jewellery. It makes sense that you would want to provide them with the right space and the right support. Which ultimately underpins the jewellery quarter as a creative mixed-use quarter. We want to be able to make sure that people can move around the jewellery quarter easily, safely, and informatively. Actually, it would be nice to know how to get to places. And then just the general jewellery quarter environment. So I hope that is of use to everybody. So here's sort of a bit of a wrap up. Ultimately, these are the things that we are trying to achieve, but it would be helpful if anyone is happy to speak or wants to just ask some questions. If there are any particular ideas that you want us to focus on, we are going to run a number of these workshops over the next 3 weeks. Our personal opinion was that people might want to zoom in on certain areas, but we need your feedback to know what you're interested in. It's no good us talking all about connectivity if everybody really just wants to understand what's going to happen with the heritage buildings. So any feedback that you can give us would really be very useful. Is there anything that you wanted to add, Matt?
No, I don't think so. I think it's it just real implore to people to have a look at it. The main document itself is a bit planning-y, whereas the plain English version hopefully does the trick of deciphering some of the unfortunately necessary planning language. But the plain English version and the maps help tell the story. And really, it's there's two types of ways of looking at it. There's the broad principles, and if you and then there's the detail, and it just depends on whether you're a detail person or a broad principle person. But if you're happy with it, there's certain aspects you support, let us know, because having that feedback to say that you support or you agree with something is as important as something where you go, I don't think you've got that quite right, or the evidence shows something else. Now, one thing that we'd love, I mean, I think all of us who've been involved with the plan over the years, and there's dozens of people, we'd love to have it be a manifesto to make the jewellery quarter the most amazing place in the country, but you have to back up what you put down on paper with evidence. So we'd all like to say, oh, it'd be nice to have X, but unless there's evidence to support that X is needed, or X is better than Y, then we haven't been able to include it. So it's worth just bearing that in mind.
Yeah, that's definitely a very, very important factor. And actually, evidence doesn't have to be data evidence. Evidence can also be anecdotal evidence. If we're getting a lot of people expressing their opinion, it is okay for us to use that. That is considered submissible. So the fact that, for example, so Ed, you've put into the questions that, and I agree with you, that the amount of space given to motorised vehicles on Newhall Street is too great. Narrower roads and wider footpaths would help connect the two areas and make it feel safer. I absolutely agree with that. In order for us to push forward on something, on some planning that would help to enable that happening, it's the kind of thing where we may need we either need data that supports that, or we need for the community to rise up and tell us. It's, you know, so if you have opinions about things, please express them, because you may think it's just one person's opinion. You may find that you are one of a very large number who think the same thing. So we really would encourage any feedback that you can give us. The things that you love about the Jewellery Quarter and you would just love to see maintained, and the things that you find really frustrating. There are all sorts of things that you can feedback about, but we need as many bits of feedback as we possibly can get from you. So a couple of the other questions that are coming, or observations really. Charlie, thank you for yours. I definitely think a mixture of creative practices within the quarter will bring a lot to the area as a whole, not just jewellery. And you're absolutely right. I'd made the point earlier, it's called the Jewellery Quarter, and obviously the jewellery industry is important, but it's not the only part of our creativity that is important. And jewellery as well is a word that doesn't necessarily fully explain how many different elements there are to that process. It's not just retail, it's not just makers, it's not just designers, it's that entire cluster. Everybody collaborates and everybody relies on one another. And we've had a lot of work with the jewellery industry where they've explained to us, actually, it's not just about the designer makers being able to be there. They also need somebody who welds, they need somebody who can set diamonds, etc. There's a huge network there. And that's actually also the same when you have marketing, and marketing has just such a vast number of people that are required within their sort of cluster. So all of these areas, we're really keen that they're all supported. If we want to be a creative district, then we must create a space that supports all of those creative areas. Absolutely, fully agree. Um, there's a point.
I'll just add to that as
Yes.
well. Sorry, the jewelry industry is over 250 years old. There's over 180 businesses that identify as jewelry industry, a part of the jewelry industry supply chain. But if you do, if through planning, if we don't provide creative industry space as a kind of a catch-all, then what you do is stifle the ability of an industry to evolve, because the part of the future of the jewelry industry is about bespoke design. It's about one-offs. It's also about 3D printing and investing in technology.
Yeah.
And if we kind of go, oh well, it's got to be dirty old factories, then that's a way of killing it off. Whereas studio work and laboratory work, the assay office has laboratories in it. You need to allow all of that flexibility to allow an industry to evolve for the next 250 years as well.
Somebody's made an interesting point around that developments appear at this stage to be predominantly residential. Developments going up on and around Camden Street are concerning. Heaton House, which has disregarded the height restrictions of the Jewellery Quarter developments and look and feel of the area. Matt, that's a very planning specific question, because obviously the Jewellery Quarter is a conservation area and does have limitations, but there are some exclusions. Matt, do you know, can you comment on the Heaton House? I think that's Elevate.
Yeah. So that specifically, I suspect the rationale for allowing them to breach the 4-story height limit is because of the preservation of the Heaton House itself. So it becomes a trade-off. More broadly, I think there's a couple of things to point out about residential. First of all, the Jewellery Quarter came into being as a residential area. So when it was first turned over from fields to what it is now, it was housing that was built. So in the life of the Jewellery Quarter, residential is not unusual. But what we've got to be careful of is you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, in terms of if you end up with apartment blocks that are full of small flats, for example, they become very difficult to use again as a building in future. We are constrained by national planning policy and Birmingham planning policy. We have to comply with those, and they both say that there's got to be more housing. So if you accept that there's got to be more housing in the Jewellery Quarter, what you then do is say, right, where is housing appropriate? Where should it not be, because it endangers other types of uses? And that's why we've specifically identified this creative district at the heart of it. But then we've got policies on having diversity in the housing offer, so different sizes, different tenures, so that we don't end up with effectively a dormitory area of people who live in a small flat, probably only for a year or two, and then walk into work and then move out to the suburbs. We want to get that. It's proper sustainability where buildings last for a long time, but also putting communities are sustained and last for a long time as well.
Lovely. Are there any additional questions that we can help with? We're interested to know if this is useful information to everybody, whether people were aware of the neighbourhood plan coming together. As Matt said, obviously it's been a lot of work over 7 years, but it remains draft for a very good reason, which is we really need to put this in front of everybody and say, well, do you agree? What do you think? We've come across very few people who don't agree that this is the direction of travel, but it is important for us to understand your feedback. Somebody has asked what happens next, basically. So I can give you a very quick roadmap as such. It's not hugely detailed, but ultimately we're in what is considered the first public consultation. Once this consultation finishes, and we'd just like to make the point, we are required to make this public for 6 weeks. We've actually made it public by the time it finishes for 9 weeks. That's to allow for much longer for people to engage with us in light of COVID. We really weren't sure whether people would be able to come out and meet in previous, with other neighbourhood plans around the country. This may well have been an in-person workshop previously. So we've allowed 9 weeks. That ends at the end of September. We then have a period of collecting in all of your feedback and basically deciding with each piece of feedback whether it goes into the plan or if there's a reason to respond and explain why at this stage it won't. Then we submit our final, our final draft goes into the local planning authority, so Birmingham City Council. They will appoint an examiner, who will examine our plan, and dependent on what the examiner finds, they might require some things to be changed in light of national planning policy or local planning policy. But ultimately, once they're happy with it, we are then going to run to a referendum. So sorry everybody, but another one of those. So we will then go back out to the community to publicise it and say, please come along and support this. We aren't able at this stage, because of COVID, all referendums have been basically paused until May next year. So we will not be able at this stage to run the referendum prior to that. But it means that at that stage, we will be reconnecting with everybody and asking you all to hopefully go to, St Paul's Church, etc., and go and vote for it. As I said earlier, we have to run a double referendum, so one for the businesses and one for the residents. We need both sides of that to be more than 50% in favour. If both sides are in favour, with more than 50% of the vote is yes to support it, then it is adopted by the council and it becomes policy, essentially. So the nice thing is you can refresh it every 5 years. So for those of you who think, do you know what, you didn't go far enough this time, for which there may be very good reasons, but if we think that there are more things that need adding in next time around, that it can be developed. It's not one plan done and you never change it. It can be revisited. More things can be added in, things can be taken out. Obviously, each time you have to go to referendum, but so lots of opportunities for people to get involved. Ed's asked a question: are there any similar examples of a well-implemented plan such as this elsewhere in the country? Matt, you might know the answer to this better, but I know that we're not completely unique, but we're an area that was designated as special, basically, because it was both business and residential, and because we had so much that we wanted to achieve. A lot of neighbourhood plans will be about the village green or a specific plot of land. So ours is obviously a lot more widespread across an entire area, sort of culturally and economically. Matt, do you know of any particular plans that perhaps fit ours?
There are, off the top of my head, I don't know of any that are in place. The key is that neighbourhood plans, the uptake, I think there's over 1,000 have been made now across the country, but they tend to be in rural areas and either suburb or particularly villages, as you say. But there are a number of urban. There's one in place in Balsall Heath in Birmingham, and that's well regarded over there. It's quite a different story because it is largely residential. It focuses on effectively the local centre plus the residential area, but there's Kensington, there's one in Kensington, there's one in Southwark, which is quite similar, and they're at a similar stage to us, I believe. But I think it's difficult. There's quite a few urban ones that are unique. Therefore, you can bunch a load of unique ones together, they're all very different to each other. Is probably the easiest way to describe it. But neighbourhood plans overall are very popular and very well regarded. Out of the 1,000, only one was rejected at referendum, and that's because the people who wrote the plan campaigned against it because the council modified it too much. So everywhere else, the neighbourhood plans have had huge, not just kind of slight majorities, but huge majorities in favour.
No pressure, Jill Recorder.
We've got quite a few.
Yeah, we've got a lot of questions coming through. One of them, Chris has asked. I'm sorry, Matt. I'm picking up just because we've lost you a little bit there. Mr. Chris has just asked how the bomb site. There's obviously a large tower planned for that site. Actually, the 4 height restriction ends at the canal. So the other side of the canal, that what we would call sort of city core end of the Jewellery Quarter, you'll note the BT Tower is there, Millennium Apartments is there. There are towers already in that area of the district. So unfortunately, it is deemed appropriate, as it is the end of the Jewellery Quarter that somewhat melds into the city core. So I hear your question, but it's not necessarily a massive step backwards. It's just we have to appreciate that different areas of the quarter will have different needs, and in that particular area, they have designed it in a way, and we've, I know Matt particularly has spent quite a lot of time with them, but there's been a lot of work done for it to be, whilst it is tall, appropriate. So I hope that does answer your point. There have been a couple of questions around independent businesses and what sort of safeguarding there is in place. Nick has asked, the Rock and Roll Brewery have been, I'm not entirely sure what the full question was, but that they have been affected, I presume, by other businesses. So that is, Matt, is that one that you can answer?
Yeah, so I think basically the underlying issue with Rock and Roll when they were forcibly relocated is developers, particularly ones from out of town, coming in and basically speculating in the Jewellery Quarter. Now, there are a couple of things that the neighbourhood plan does to help mitigate this situation. You'll never stop someone coming into a popular area and say, I'm going to buy it up because it's going to be worth more next year than it is this year. But what the fact that a neighbourhood plan is in place and is new means that people buying land know what the rules are. And one of the reasons for doing the neighbourhood plan is that the rules have been able to be exploited a bit recently. So you can buy at one value, exploit the rules and sell at a higher value. Whereas a fresh neighbourhood plan, an updated conservation area management plan will quite clearly say what you can and can't do, and therefore land will be priced accordingly. The other bit, which talks about independent businesses and creative businesses, the best way, best way to help them in terms of rents is to make sure that there's a plentiful supply of units. Because if you only have 100 units, then the more popular an area becomes, the higher the rents will be. If you have 100 units, but there's a plentiful supply of more in new developments, potentially residential developments, then it keeps rents competitive.
And there's been another observation, car parking spaces being taken over by some parklets. For those of you who know me, this is a an item very close to my heart, having just put a parklet into the Colmore Business District. I completely agree. I think that is something that is definitely driven by community desire. But it is actually, for us, I think that is something that we're trying to achieve through those nodes, through that as I think we described it as the string of pearls, a bit of a play on jewelry. But ultimately, yes, introducing more pockets of greenery. As everyone's probably aware, the Jewellery Quarter, because it's an industrial heritage, the conservation and the heritage will resist greening, and yet that's actually what the majority of residents want. So if you do want greening, please include that in your feedback, because whilst we may not be able to put that into the actual building design, that could be used for our public realm in between. So that would be a way to drive more of that greening and add those sort of parklets or nodes throughout the area. So Matt, do you have any others that have we not? Oh, Brian, excellent question. So Brian's question: I've heard there is a project to create a town council for the Jewellery Quarter. How could this impact on the neighbourhood plan? It is correct that there is a project to attempt to create a town council. It would impact, but actually we believe, although there's obviously quite a lot of work to be done behind this, they have only just started gathering their thoughts, but ultimately it would complement the neighbourhood plan. The town council would essentially springboard from the neighbourhood plan's existence, and because of that would ultimately be mandated to make sure that what we have come up with is then delivered. So our belief is that it would be a positive thing, but obviously they would equally have to go through a lot of public consultation, so there'd be plenty of opportunity while they go through that to question that and to understand, will you be upholding the neighbourhood plan? Matt, did I miss anything on that?
No, I don't think so. Probably just from a legal perspective, the neighbourhood plan is produced by a neighbourhood planning forum, and so that is a bunch of people who have a legal designation whilst the plan is created, and then the plan is in place. So anything that happens thereafter, whilst the plan is still period, is, you know, planning applications have to be judged with the neighbourhood plan in mind, full stop.
Okay, lovely. So I'm conscious that it's 5 to 2 and we all need to go and do our day jobs. So I just want to wrap up by saying thank you to everybody for coming, and thank you for all your questions. We'll take those questions, we will answer them, and we'll post them back out so that everyone will actually see some form of answer to them. So apologies if there were any that we didn't get to. You guys went from being silent to being full of questions, which was brilliant, but it just means that we just not quite managed to get to all of them. But we really, really thank you for all your engagement. Please do go and check out the page on the jewelleryquarter.net website, and please do give us any feedback. We will be sending out, there are additional workshops that we're going to run online. At the moment, those are planned for specific topics, so please either book onto them yourselves or share them amongst your friends or neighbours in the Jewellery Quarter. We need as much engagement as we can get, because whilst you know, if nobody responds and we get it through anyway, that's probably easy. That's not really what we want. We really want to have a strong mandate for this. We want strong support. We want to be able to show good, strong figures of engagement. We're not afraid of engagement, and you know, you don't have to agree with everything. We understand that. So anything from you, Matt, before we go?
No, just thank you again. Thank you for everyone who's attended.
Thank you. Excellent. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and we'll see you soon, no doubt. Thank you.